Education Gateway webinar on developing entrepreneurial skills and mindset through education. Hello, I'm Elin McCallum, and I work with the School Education Gateway as the coordinator of the collaborative space on entrepreneurship education, and we've pulled together this webinar as a webinar to really focus on the why, when and how of using EntreComp, the European Competence Reference Framework for the entrepreneurship key competence, particularly thinking about it from a national Erasmus Plus agency perspective. We feel that we've had feedback to say that there's particular interest, and I think that's definitely borne out in the number of participants and the interest in this webinar. So just to let you know, the School Education Gateway is really a resource developed by the European Commission for schools and organisations working with schools and education across Europe and indeed around the world. And the collaborative space for entrepreneurship education within that is a forum space for those interested in this key competence, looking at it very much from a skills and mindset perspective, looking at what resources are out there. We'd very much welcome you to join that, and the link will be within the chat box coming in from my great colleagues Elina and Asi from European SchoolNet here, who are helping to and facilitating this webinar. So thanks to them who are doing all the behind the scenes work today. So today, what can you expect? We're going to look at EntreComp, which is this European framework that lays out what it means in practical terms to be entrepreneurial, to break down that key competence into something that can translate into a wide variety of different learning settings, professional settings, and particularly really look at that in terms of Erasmus Plus and what it means for the national agencies who are looking to develop their knowledge, perhaps understand the context behind projects that are applying for this, perhaps understand how they can support it, perhaps. So we're very pleased to have you with us. We also need to welcome Margherita Bacigalupo, who is the author and lead coordinator for EntreComp in the Joint Research Centre, part of the European Commission. And obviously DG Education and Culture and DG Employment particularly are very involved in the development of this framework. It's integral to the new revision of the key competence framework for lifelong learning that's being done right now, led by, of course, DG Education and Culture. It was also mentioned and highlighted within the new skills agenda for Europe that was launched in June 2016. Indeed, that's when it was launched. And I think its importance is emerging. We've also just published the EntreComp Interaction User Guide, which we will talk about today as well. So if there's anything particular you want to cover, please pop it in the chat box. Any topics, any issues, any questions you may have, please pop it in the chat box. We'll try and keep an eye on that through the presentations. So we're going to have an introduction to EntreComp from Margherita. Then we're going to look into a few different projects that have come through that use EntreComp. And then we really want to try and create, as this environment will allow us to, a bit of interaction on, okay, what does this mean to you? What are you thinking of? What perhaps support do you need? What are next steps that we can do, we can support, we can help with? All the organisations that are watching this, there's some key organisations here, from European SchoolNet to the DG Education and Culture to wider international organisations and support services that can perhaps help to shape and support national agencies who have such an important role in driving the level and quality of projects that address such a wide range of different learning settings, learning levels across different topics, and addressing obviously the European priorities within those. So I'm very pleased to have you with us, and I'm very pleased, if I can, to perhaps now pass on to a quick poll that we have organised for you, just to understand. This is your first question, starter for 10, as they would say on University Challenge in the UK. How many Erasmus projects are there using EntreComp? Obviously, we do not think you will know. So this is a guess for you. Okay, how many do you think there are? Obviously, it was launched around 18 months ago. 20 months ago. You know, it's something that was launched in the New Skills Agenda. It's being referenced in the revision of the Key Competence Framework for Lifelong Learning. So what do we think? Okay, we've got 3 on 1 to 10. We've got 7 on 30 plus. Ambitious. And then and sort of 40% in between. And we're broadcasting the results, so hopefully you can see this live action on screen. Okay, so we've got a fairly convincing majority that would say above 20. And then a few less would say below 20. We have 37 participants in this webinar thus far, though, so we've not got all of you responding. So there's no right or wrong answer for you, although we do know the answer. And we're actually going to ask another question as well. What's the next question? I'm looking to Ashley to flag up the next poll here. Not that one. No, it was the name your project. So we have, for those who you know, do you know a project out there addressing EntreComp that's got EntreComp anywhere featured in the project? Erasmus Plus project. Name your project. Any offers? Oh, people are already typing. Carolina is typing. Florian is typing. Anyone else? We've just finished a webinar on policymakers, directed at policymakers this morning, and we've actually got people from both. So well done if you're attending both webinars. Success, yeah, great project looking at the entrepreneurial competencies for social enterprise. Carolina, no knowledge of it yet. By the end of this hour, you will have some knowledge of EntreComp, definitely, we hope. If you don't, we've done our job wrong and we apologize, but we hope we do. And we've got other people typing. So this indicates there's not a flurry. There's not a wide number of examples coming through. So, you know, that's great for us because it means that we can share this with you, we can let you know. So without further ado, I will hand over to Margherita, who is there based in Sevilla and looking forward to talking to you. We'll transfer to her presentation now and she'll take you through the great initiative that is EntreComp. Margherita.
Can you hear me now? Well, thank you for the introduction, Elin, and also thank you very much for setting the scene so I can be fast on providing information on the part of the commission I work for, which is the Joint Research Center, basically the research arm of the commission. We do support to policymakers in Brussels, and also you can see the institute is scattered around Europe. The research center is scattered around Europe to be detached from the policy debate enough to allow researchers to work under the rhythm of research that are slower, definitely slower than the one happening in Brussels under the pressure of policy work. So with respect to EntreComp and the Entrepreneurship Competence Framework, this work started end of 2014 with the literature review on what was happening on entrepreneurship as a competence, so as a competence for lifelong learning, stemming from the original recommendation on key competencies that defined a sense of initiative and entrepreneurship as a key competence for lifelong learning. In parallel to our work, Eurydice, so the research arm directly linked to the GEAC, conducted a study on the European school landscape on this topic, finding that the landscape more or less 10 years after the key competence recommendation was very diverse. Very diverse in terms of understanding of what entrepreneurship competence is, could be, and was intended in the recommendation as a broad notion, and also interpreted differently across levels of education. So this proliferation of approaches led to to the work we carried out, to create a basis for harmonizing, if not the approach, at least the understanding. So EntreComp was published in 2016 in June, more or less in the same time as the New Skills Agenda, to create a common language. So it's a comprehensive framework that defines entrepreneurship in a lifelong learning perspective. So it has to embrace education from primary. I've also had the chance to talk to pre-primary teachers. So yes, here in Spain there is a lot of interest on this topic, even in pre-primary school. But also embrace non-formal and informal learning in inclusion settings, youth work setting, but also on the job place and in initiatives like incubators and accelerators that are fostering the starting up or growth of commercial venture. So the language had to be broad and the framework had to be really comprehensive. In no moment in time it has been intended as a curriculum, a program, a course, a process, something mandatory in any way. It's a reference document that is encompassing, broad, very detailed, but still specific, in the sense it has to fit all these different contexts. Therefore, it has to be turned into something meaningful for the relevant context. We have examples at the end, further down in the presentation, to let you understand what it means to specify this framework for a specific context. And it's important, I think maybe someone can add a link in the chat to the EntreComp into Action guide. I must say that the lead author of this work that SJRC contracted out was Elin McCallum, so she's well aware of all the initiatives that are featured in this manual that was created, again, not to give instruction on how to proceed with EntreComp, because it's a flexible tool that you can use the way it's more relevant for you. And as Erasmus Plus agencies, those that come from the agency, you have to the possibility to understand it as a framework that can be used to different purposes. So the guide presents 70 plus initiatives that are building on the framework or can be used to build on the framework. Some are references that we found useful, although they are not directly stemming out of work on EntreComp. But they have the broadest scope you can imagine. There is a very great variety of initiatives. So a bit our mission today in talking to you is to let you understand that if you are not familiar with this work on the entrepreneurship education debate, and you think that entrepreneurship is about providing people with the right skills for them to either set up their own business or self-employ, well, there will be a lot of surprises, because the definition that we use for entrepreneurship education, I skip some slides, is entrepreneurship is when you act upon opportunities and ideas to transform them into value for others. Value that can be financial, cultural, or social. So there is no necessary link with the creation of a commercial venture. It can be creating a business is for sure something that is a potential outcome of using EntreComp to foster entrepreneurial learning. However, it's not the only one. The competencies that are in the framework apply to all spheres of life. They are really transversal, so they can help those who develop them transition from a life setting to another one with the same attitude towards creating value. value for others, value that is a change-making value that can create innovative things or just create, import in a setting something that is not innovative in the world but is needed in that setting. And it could be also creating, I don't know, social movement and awareness raising campaign, activism kind of action. So bear this in mind along the entire presentation, because entrepreneurship as a competence and not as a scientific discipline is something about creating value for others, acting, and is something that is both individual and collective. As Elin mentioned before, this debate is now, or the possibility to discuss today this framework is very timely, because the revision of the key competency recommendation will bring under the spotlight the EntreComp, as it will clearly refer to it. And I guess that if now we have counted approximately 25-30 Erasmus Plus funded projects that refer to the EntreComp. We haven't counted, we have no means to know how many proposals have been submitted but not accepted. But in the upcoming call in November, after the expected date for the key competence recommendation 2.0, let's say, is foreseen for May. If in May it comes out, my assumption is that in November even more proposals will refer to the EntreComp. And also something that is very important is that the ambition of the Commission to foster a European education area where more collaboration on the topic of education is promoted. Then, since there is an item on the communication that refers to further collaboration on curriculum development, EntreComp is one of the example of reference material that is there to foster such, to enable such collaboration. Again, since it's not prescriptive, it has to be used as a dictionary to understand each other and say, I work on these competencies, you work on these others, I work on the same competence as you but at a lower level of proficiency or an higher one. You're in a value chain perspective, life cycle perspective, everyone could fit their own contribution using the same language. So it's a practical reference, the purpose. The framework is made up of 3 areas. One that deals with ideas and opportunities, one that deals with the resources, personal, internal resources and external one, and the third refers to the transformation of ideas and opportunity into action. So if you open the wheel, you will get the 15 competencies that make up the framework, and you can see that there are in the blue area, ideas and opportunity, the things that come up to our mind when we think about being entrepreneurial, that is generating creative solutions, spotting opportunities, valuing ideas, so out of a process of generating multiple ideas, the selection of the ideas that have potential value and that have a sustainable future is an important part to build a vision that will guide action afterwards. Resources are the elements that transform, that has to be leveraged to transform these ideas into action. And we are talking about personal resources like motivation, perseverance, or self-awareness and self-efficacy, as well as external resources that could be monetary resources where appropriate, financial and economic literacy is referring to the knowledge that is required to manage the budget of a venture, whatever it is, even if it's a campaign for an action, community action. Often there are funds to be raised in order to achieve the goals. So financial and economic literacy is not intended as a skill only for doing the accountancy of a company. And then there are competencies like mobilizing resources, and resources can be material and non-material. Non-material resourcing being competencies that you don't have. So if you need a legal advisor to select the best legal format for your venture, this is mobilizing the right competencies you need to be sure to achieve your purpose of value creation. And mobilizing others, again, is a broad competencies that deals with getting others on board of our ideas. And it can be, if we are trying to mobilize volunteers to support us in collecting plastic from the shore, is getting the volunteers, or is getting the business angel believe in our project and look for the funds we need. Or it can be, if we are working within an organization, mobilizing our hierarchy to support us in achieving the value creating activity that fits with our mandate. The green part is the into action part, and it deals with the planning and management, organizing the work, taking the initiative, the responsibility to bring things forward, to do what one commits to do, the part on dealing with the uncertainty that value creation endeavor always bring around. So coping with ambiguity, uncertainty, and risk is an important competence that could also be seen in the blue part or in the orange part, but is we located it into action section, working with others and learning through experience. It's important to state that this is not the table of periodic elements. So this is a way to create a narrative. So the three actions, the three areas embed or embody the definition of turning ideas and opportunity into value for others. So, and this action part and the using of the resources to act upon these opportunities, and also the 15 competencies inside, they have been clustered this way, but they could have been clustered in other ways. It's important to know that behind this clustering, there is the agreement of hundreds of people. In the process of creating this framework, really hundreds of people have been involved in iterative stages along 18 months period. So although this is not the truth, there is no truth, but this is a shared vision, broadly shared. So the framework goes in detail. So for each competence, you get a table with a hint and a description. And per each competence, you see the area here, and you see 3 competencies selected, 1 per each area. Each competence is further detailed into thematic threads from 3 to 5, more or less. So if we take in the initiatives, you have take action, work independently, and take responsibility, have the themes that are developed for this competence. And then we enter in the fine-grained level of the progression model. EntreComp defines 8 levels of proficiency, from a very basic foundation level to a very expert level, with 8 steps in between, that start from showing the competence at a foundation level under the support of someone, with the support of someone in a defined context, safe context, so to say. So it's discovering, exploring what it means to create value. And then in progression, it leads to a level of expertise in which the learner is expected to achieve learning outcomes that enable the driving on transformation, innovation, and growth. So we are going from a very limited level of complexity to a level of complexity that could be embedded in any global competitive scenarios that you can think of, from business side or global challenges like climate change. So being entrepreneurial in leading the possible solution to climate change will bring you to a level of expertise that is around here. if you are exploring value creation activity under guidance in a summer school or in a first attempt, then most likely most of competence will be here. This progression model generates, matched with in a table with all the 60 threads for the 15 competencies and the 8 level of progression this side, we create a nice matrix that you can find at the end of the guidelines page 179, I believe. You start seeing all the learning outcomes. So per each cell of this matrix, we have a learning outcome per each of the threads, per each of the relative progression steps. So just to give you an idea, not to enter in the detail of everything, but at foundation level, if we are looking to the area of ideas and opportunities, looking at the creativity competence and the threads develop ideas, you can start from a very basic level that says, I can develop ideas that solve problems that are relevant to me and my surroundings, to an expert level where I can design new processes to involve stakeholders in generating, developing, and testing ideas that create value. Now, you will ask, who are the stakeholders? What are the processes? How do I test? Who knows? Well, this is what I was meaning. It depends on the context. So if you are working on climate change and the contribution of the automotive industry, let's say, to climate change, and the possibility to shift towards clean fuel, well, this is a context that is completely different from a context in which you are looking at, say, reducing food waste if you are in the food manufacturing industry, or if you are an activist that is advocating for action against food wastage. So it's important to understand that these learning outcomes have to be tailored. And you will see that there is this enormous wealth of Erasmus Plus funded projects that are actually trying to do exactly this job. So EntreComp, as I mentioned already, deals with, it's applicable to different domains, from formal education to non-formal learning and inclusion action, to learning on the job, learning for employability, learning or even mentoring process within an existing venture, a company where a career path is developed. So it's being a reference, it can be used to the purpose. And it can be used to achieve different goals, from mobilizing the interest of peers and engage, start a debate on the importance of entrepreneurial learning in a certain context, to other goals that could be the appraise and assessment of one contribution to entrepreneurial learning, assess what is being done within an organization, within an initiative, or to implement a new solution, new resources, or even to recognize and certify skills that are developed at a certain level of proficiency. So depending on the level of detail that ones want to achieve with their own initiative, EntreComp can be looked at different levels of granularity. So what I want to say with this, maybe I've not been clear, is that EntreComp is not telling anyone what to do and how to do it. Those who want to promote entrepreneurial learning believe that these skills are fundamental for facing 21st century challenges and want to promote them, find in EntreComp a useful instrument to clarify their ideas and to communicate with others, mobilize as a platform of common understanding. We have seen in many of the projects that we have revised that, especially in Erasmus Plus project or European funded project, also the Horizon 2021, EntreComp is a very good basis for all partners to understand what they're talking about. because no matter how much one works on a proposal, is often the case that scoping the actual work requires a big deal of discussion on what is actually the topic we are discussing. And I can say that unanimously in the project we have seen, people use EntreComp to the purpose, define what they want to focus. Some focus on the 15 competencies, some other focus on a subset of those, depending on their own objective. Maybe I can leave the floor to questions if they are directly to me, or Elin can take it up from here and go into the example of some of the Erasmus Plus funded projects that we find can give you an idea of the breadth of these competencies.
Thank you very much, Margherita. Does anyone have any questions right now for Margherita? She's been through the framework itself, but also, you know, the introduction through how you can use it, the different areas of the framework, how those can be used, the applicability to different sectors, levels of learning, and how the EntreComp Interaction User Guide can support that process. And we'll next go through to providing a little bit of insight into the types, the different projects that are EU funded and are already featuring EntreComp. Because if we consider that the EntreComp framework was launched in just June 2016, then actually it's not that long ago. And in terms of Erasmus Plus funding, it's not very many rounds of, there's not very many national agency level rounds of applications that have taken place. I think you guys know more than I do, but the Erasmus Plus strategic partnerships, for example, you know, that's a big funding round that happens in sort of February, March each year. In fact, it's just been completed this year. So that's went through in February, March 2017, and then we understand. Well, I'll share in a minute how many projects have been established since then. So, question from Carolina. Can this framework be used to find peers for the implementation of activities of a specific project? So is this that you're looking for, can the framework be used to actually find collaborators? Is that right? Just to quickly check that. Because I think at the moment, if we look at sort of finding collaborators, finding people that are interested in EntreComp, there's a Facebook group, and there's a LinkedIn group, there's Twitter, there's the EntreComp hashtag on Twitter, and there's also the EntreComp Interaction hashtag on Twitter. So there would be an opportunity there to sort of find a space to talk to people that are interested in common frameworks. The other opportunity, of course, is to establish your own discussion forum, perhaps in LinkedIn, specifically to say, if you're interested in EntreComp and developing a project idea around that, then you know you can open that discussion within the many groups on LinkedIn that deal with bringing together collaborators, finding new collaborators for European-funded project applications. Does that answer your question, Carolina? Because the other option would be to find peers for the implementation of specific activities. Well, that's perhaps also something that you can use the School Education Gateway for, both to find people who are interested in similar topics, but also to find peers to collaborate on in applications again. I would also advocate having a look at the e-twinning group for schools, particularly for teachers who have an academic email, a schools-based email. You can log in and become a member of the e-twinning group on entrepreneurship education, and they really focus on the teaching and learning side of it. But of course, behind that is the opportunity to find people who have a common vision of what of how EntreComp can be integrated into projects and activities. So if hopefully that answers your question, Carolina. Any more questions at this stage? Otherwise, we'll move on to answering the question that we posed at the beginning of this webinar. Perhaps we can get the new PowerPoint loaded up. Great, that answered Carolina's question. Perfect. So I can just click through here, I think. Yes, I can. There we go. So how many Erasmus Plus projects are there using EntreComp? This was the question, and we have here, I will add at this point, I know a lot of the projects using EntreComp, but actually Margherita did a trawl of the Erasmus Plus project repository, which you can find through a link that we'll share with you through the presentations. So there's actually 22 in the EntreComp Into Action user guide, and we trawled widely through a range of different networks, obviously not just under the hashtag entrepreneurship, but also under the hashtags of social inclusion, citizenship, pedagogy, job development, skills development, entrepreneur development. We really tried to look at diverse sectors. So there's 22 that we've identified in there, and we'll speak about just a few of them in a moment. But also the Erasmus Plus project repository, which Margherita looked through, you can search by the hashtag EntreComp in there, and we found 8 that we didn't know about. Or rather, Margherita found 8 that she didn't know about. So that's very interesting as well. You can see then that that's 30 projects, and that's really within 1 year, and that's when the framework was launched, but there wasn't a user guide, and the additional promotion had not happened significantly. And I think this is where the impetus, the keenness for this webinar comes from, is because if there's 30 in 1 year, imagine how many will have applied this week, for example, through strategic partnerships. And imagine how many could use EntreComp to add that European dimension, that European comparability when it comes to the entrepreneurship key competence to their project, be that linked to something like citizenship or employability skills, as well as when it's more purely focused on sort of entrepreneurship education. So this is where I think Margherita's explained the diverse context to which EntreComp can be applied, because it's not relating. It is truly a transversal framework, a transversal reference point for these types of skills, which are cited as important for active citizenship, for inclusion, and for employability, as well as the more traditional vision which it happens on startup and business development. I think one of the most interesting things that sometimes it's very difficult to get impact data on entrepreneurship education. It's out there, and some of it is great quality, but there's been the Erasmus Plus program has been a driver in really trying to develop that impact data. One of the projects, the Youth Start project, which is a Key Action 3 project, policy reform, they conducted randomized control trials on their challenge-based learning approach, and they found that it really did impact on, there we go, on learner engagement within the classroom. So that's something that's important to remember. So I come back. So yes, this is something that's emerging. It's something that's happening. And now I'll take you through some projects that are already happening. So UltraLearn is a toolkit that has been developed through the iLink project. You'll find all of these in the EntreComp Into Action user guide. And this really is something that's teacher focused, teaching and learning focused. Not necessarily just school-based education, it's quite versatile, although it is directed towards school-based education. And it's learning through entrepreneurship, learning through entrepreneurial approaches to learning. It's not about entrepreneurship in its classic business startup sense. So it's being entrepreneurial. Therefore, it's very applicable. There are activities in here that you could put into a science course, you could put into a history course, you could put into a religious studies course, but and you can also put them into perhaps personal social development courses as well. So that's a very interesting tool that you can pick up from the user guide that's been developed through iLink, the iLink project. Now, it was actually developed, a lot of the content came from someone called Cornelia Lohinova, who actually coordinates the e-twinning group on entrepreneurship education. So very great resource, really great resource. I would recommend going to the iLink site and downloading this. But this is one example of how they've used EntreComp to present resources that are relevant to teaching. And you can imagine within Erasmus Plus, many projects develop toolkits for teachers, develop resources for educators, develop training programs. And it would be interesting, wouldn't it, to perhaps use such a EU-wide framework, skills framework, from just a simple perspective to illustrate which skills are developed through those toolkits, to a more complex use where you could use the learning outcomes within the toolkit or training itself. Then I mentioned earlier Youth Start. This is a randomized control trial. It was a drive from the European Commission to produce evidence for entrepreneurship education. There were 2 projects funded under this Key Action 3 bid, and the other one was the ICEE project led by Junior Achievement Europe. Here is the Youth Start project, and it's really about challenge-based learning. So they've developed a model of challenge-based pedagogy that is truly engaging for learners, because that's what this project has showed, that learner engagement is a provable outcome of entrepreneurial learning pedagogy. They've designed and developed training material across 4 countries, and they really have worked to assess the impact of this through this randomized control trial, through this controlled experiment. And this is very important for the wider work that we have happening on entrepreneurial learning at EU level, because it gives us evidence for evidence-based policy making. This is something that demonstrates the methodology perhaps for Erasmus Plus projects, but also shows the applicability of entrepreneurial learning across different contexts. So social inclusion, learner inclusion, school engagement initiatives, this could be something that could be considered. And again, EntreComp would be a way to create a coherent picture of the skills and attitudes you're trying to develop, as well as looking at then guiding your mapping, your assessing what's out there already, your design and your recognition process, so that you have this common language. Now, what's the next one? And this is a great project. Now, this is the EntreComp for All project, led by a university in Spain, a great person called Edmundo Tovar. Now, they're using innovative digital technology, which I can never claim to understand, to be fair. Scraping the web for open educational resources, so really creating an algorithm to identify what's out there in the world of the internet that could be used to build personalized learning pathways to support entrepreneurial skills. And again, they're using the EntreComp model as a guide to structure this, to guide their thinking about what they need to scrape for, what are the keywords, etc., but also to guide the structure of how it's presented. And it's going to be a multilingual social and semantic software web portal. Which, you know, is exciting, I think, for people like me, because I will be able to go to this website and find a resource that I can use or adapt, or even just contact the people for. I mean, this would be an interesting source of finding peers of stuff, you know, projects that you like the look of. You can go to these people that are identified through this quite random approach. When I say random, I mean this could come up with things that really are difficult to find in other ways. Pathways for Employ. Now, this is something that is quite important to illustrate, because Pathways for Employ is one of the projects, an Erasmus Plus strategic partnership project that is about employment, employability. And here also it's about cross-referencing the digital competence framework with the entrepreneurship competence framework. So DigComp and EntreComp. Those are 2 competence reference frameworks that have been developed by Joint Research Centre for and with the European Commission and experts from across Europe. So EntreComp has been part of this research methodology for this employability project. So what are the enabling skills for entrepreneurial careers? They've used both DigComp and EntreComp to look at, say, how do they co-work together? What digital skills enable an entrepreneurial career, what entrepreneurial skills are crucial for that career. And they've used EntreComp to determine the baseline and assess the progress. So this just illustrates that it's not only sort of in the classroom, it's also looking at that career trajectory, careers pathway, career management skills, as well as personal and development skills that need to come through, and EntreComp has some significant crossover with. So they've used EntreComp because they see it as the framework which helps them to do this most effectively. And then EU3 leader, and this again we look at a profession focus, so the entrepreneurial third sector leader. So this is leadership skills, and they see EntreComp as really the transversal skills that a leader, any leader, needs to be able to strategically have a vision, create ideas about an organization's future and how they can support it, look at the resources they need, and then put ideas into action. So this flow of creative ideas into entrepreneurial action relevant to third sector leaders, and they use it to, really what they're doing is creating value here, creating new value by using EntreComp as a skills model to foster a new European profession. Create a common skills framework and a training package for third sector leaders, and they've got a cohort, a group of leaders from across Europe. It's led by the Euclid network, EUCLID, and a great woman called Marta Bruschi. And also they're developing a self-assessment tool linked to digital micro-credentials or open badges. And again, there's an opportunity here for, if you're looking at open badge development, to align that to EntreComp competencies, because an open badge is intended to validate, to recognize what someone has developed, what skills they've developed. You can easily create an open badge, Mozilla open badge, if you have an account with a platform that enables that. Some are free, some are paid for, to recognize the entrepreneurial skills of a course or activity that you're following for any audience. So this, I think, really also highlights the value of this work to new professions, to new sectors, to different sectors. Those is a quick introduction to a few of the projects that are using them. There are more, and I will quickly illustrate one interesting thing about each of the ones on the screen. Cradle, it's about language learning in primary school, and they're using entrepreneurial learning as an embedded approach to develop language. EntreAssess is about EntreAssess.com is about identifying an assessment approach that can support the recognition and assessment of entrepreneurial skills and mindset, because it's not easy. Where the recent January 2017 Eurydice report on entrepreneurship education came up with some very interesting results. One of the most interesting, I think, was the fact that no country in Europe had a system approach to the assessment of this key competence. And that is something that many teachers, many networks, many organizations say to me, if it is not assessed, if it is not valued in that qualification process, then it might not be delivered. It might not be focused on because it's an extra, it's something that's not valued. You don't, if you're teaching to the test, then you don't teach those skills. You focus on what the student needs to get through that qualification in order to get to the next stage of their educational career. EntreAssess seeks to start that conversation about how we can assess these skills. There are other projects doing that, and there's a lot of work to be done. The HE Innovate is also a great resource in this respect. EntreComp Edu is a new project that is focused on developing a professional skills framework for teachers and from schools and vet levels primarily. What skills do they need to practically deliver and facilitate entrepreneurship education, entrepreneurial education? And just to say, I'm involved in, my organization, Bantani Education, is involved in all three of those projects. Ecosystem App is again a platform which offers training for teachers to develop their ability to deliver entrepreneurial learning. EntreComp Edu is learning a lot from that particular program. Success is a great EU project led by an organization in Italy, including the University of Bologna, on social entrepreneurship and applying EntreComp with that. Lean is about liminality and entrepreneurship education, and a network supporting that. Then we've got the examples coming down here. Maybe I'll just flag up a couple of them. Commit Plus is community-based actors, really engaging community-based actors in the development of these entrepreneurial skills and competencies. Breaking the Desk is about artists and how building entrepreneurial skills with artists can support the wider community. And then WOW is about women and women entrepreneurship. So this is something. So those are the projects that have come through now. You can see that there are some that are more traditional in their interpretation of entrepreneurship education, and some that are perhaps more diverse, Cradle being one of those, really looking at language learning. EU3 leaders really looking at creating the sort of professional skills framework for leaders. And there's emerging relevance to different types of approaches. There's also a project that isn't flagged up on this slide, but is the Competendo project. It's in the user guide in the EntreComp Into Action, and that's got some great developing handbooks for youth work, for youth-based education, and also looking at the organizations involved there are very linked to human rights education and citizenship education, which I think I flagged up is something that is relevant. So that's an introduction to some of the Erasmus Plus funded projects that are in the guide and that we know about. There are more. I am sure there are more. The one that is more focused on teacher trainers is Ecosystem App. That's a project that's already completed. They mapped a training program for educators against the EntreComp framework back in the very early days of EntreComp. EntreComp Edu is probably the follow-up project to that, which is looking at the professional skills framework for educators. And I think for educators, you probably would also want to look at Entre Assess, which is going to be publishing its results quite soon on how to support the assessment abilities of teachers and the pathway to create more robust assessment of entrepreneurial competences as well. We can certainly share the links to you, but also you will be able to, if you just Google Commit Plus and you Google the intents alongside the organization name from the user guide, you should be able to find them. Any problems, please, get in touch. You can get in touch through the collaborative space. You can get in touch directly with the European SchoolNet, who facilitate this group as well. Okay, so I will now move on, I think, to perhaps opening up the discussion to first of all, you've had inspiration about this, the applicability of this work to Erasmus Plus projects. But you generally, many of you, most of you, represent national agencies or organizations that work closely with a national agency for Erasmus Plus. I think when I think from the perspective of an Erasmus Plus agency, I think about, well, EntreComp is a European level policy tool to support this key competence. And if we want that policy tool, that guidance, that dictionary of those 15 competencies backed up by the learning outcomes beneath it, we need to feed that into practice. And one of the major routes for that is through Erasmus Plus and therefore through the national agencies, because this supports the Erasmus Plus priorities, be they linked directly to key competencies or possibly, linked to citizenship, to social inclusion, to portability, to the transparency and recognition across sectors in developing cross-sectoral collaboration. It's not only those priorities that mention entrepreneurship, but potentially those that don't, because this is a very transversal framework in its applicability to different contexts, different learning areas, and impacting on different priorities. So it also enables, I think, from a perspective of an Erasmus Plus national agency, a comparability between projects and a point of commonality between projects. So you're able to because these projects will be using the same framework, there might be work that can be done to explore the most effective routes, success factors, what they're addressing. Is this enough? Are there gaps? You know, this is something that could be something for the European level. It could be something for a national agency, but certainly also it's a point to bring them together. And I think it's a mark of quality as well. So if a new application is aligning to the EntreComp framework, be it in a small way, perhaps just by using it as an initial research tool or a mapping tool, or be it in a more comprehensive way, where they're going to be trying to create a common language across different stakeholders, or recognizing and validating training or education approaches using EntreComp-based approaches, then that's a mark of quality, because they're aligning to something that is EU level, is being promoted at EU level, and fundamentally will help perhaps at EU level, perhaps at local level, to create that comparability and the common language. So that sort of, when I think of the work from a national agency perspective, that's sort of thoughts that I come up with. I don't know if there are any others that come up for you. You know, what else would, and Margherita has suggested bringing together results in a common resource bank would be a great idea. Absolutely. I think this is something that is very important, because there are different places that we can do that, and sometimes, but a central point would be wonderful, that is perhaps EU supported and EU promoted, perhaps by the national agencies, because you have such wonderful contact with your networks, both of previous projects and new projects, and you're a source of advice for projects in development also. Perhaps you need to, is there a role for training, more training for yourselves, but also then, some information, advice and training resources for the projects coming through on how they can use EntreComp. Letitia has said we need to translate. Yes, I think this is a huge thing, and this is feedback that keeps coming through. And of course, it is something that can be done at national level. One of the projects highlighted in the user guide is the Greek translation. And I think it's an important one to mention, because the Greek translation, if you just translated it through Google, and even if it was an amazing translation through Google, they would translate entrepreneurship to a word that simply and only was relevant to business, purely relevant to business. And that wouldn't be translating the sense and the philosophy behind EntreComp. And so that's where translation is important. Translation is something that it's not just the word, it's also the context and the understanding behind it, that thinking process behind it to truly bring that through. So I think translation is crucial, not necessarily simple. So absolutely agree with that. We've got someone else and some other comments coming through as well. I think I'd like to perhaps open up for your ideas now, and we've got a few questions that we're going to open in a chat box. So you can see it now. One of the roles for Erasmus Plus projects is to be a point of information, a point of support for your country to make the most of this amazing funding resource that we have in Erasmus Plus, for every sector. So what one simple action can you take? What ideas do you have about sharing the EntreComp Into Action user guide, which is intended to support the organizations in your network to implement, to really take on, understand, see the potential, and see their next steps in using EntreComp? So what's one simple action? Please add some ideas in there now. That would be great. It would be very interesting to see what you feel could be the avenues to really take EntreComp to a truly European level, to truly enable it to be shared across different sectors, different organizations. Because it's hard to get such a tool shared to the grassroots level. There are different channels, different options, but what ideas do you have, and what simple action can you take to support that? I'll just go quiet for a couple of minutes while you add your ideas. So So we haven't got any ones coming through yet. Who's going to be the first one? So if you share, what are the channels that you have to share information with your users? So absolutely, just signing grant agreements, demonstrate it in different events, yes. Using courses on youth social entrepreneurship, that someone's already shared it on the agency's website news page, brilliant. Training, knowledge sharing activities through the TCA budget line. Can someone explain to me what the TCA budget line is? That would be great, thank you. I wonder, linked to websites, Facebook, brilliant, absolutely. I wonder if there is something that can be simply done around communications, because I also think the evaluators at national level need to have this information as well. Margherita mentioned to me earlier, we were discussing the different sort of areas, and she mentioned to me earlier that as someone that's obviously been the driving force, the author of EntreComp, she prepared a short, I don't know what, video for the evaluators of the recent Horizon 2020 project call that focused on creativity and innovation. So she created a video for the evaluators of that call to ensure that they understood EntreComp and how it can be used in order to really be aware of it coming through the applications, because for that call, EntreComp was certainly a mark of quality. Okay, great. So an old-fashioned link sharing in emails to outside institutions. Absolutely. I have a link in my email with a pretty picture beside it as well. As does Margherita. Okay, great. So there's some interesting actions coming through, and these are very simple things that you can do, definitely. So thank you very much for that. Now, obviously then, so you know, Erasmus Plus agencies have a role to share, but I wonder if we can also explore how you feel you can use EntreComp and how it should be embedded into your work. What are the actions that need to happen in order to enable that to happen? So from this, if we go to the next discussion point now. Okay, someone just explained TCA is the training and cooperation activities, so a budget line that national agencies have in order to share information about the program, organize training courses and other events for partnership and capacity building. Absolutely, that would be a great forum to share information on EntreComp. So this is it. So which one simple action are you inspired to take following this webinar about using EntreComp in your work? And this is where, you know, we consider using EntreComp in terms of integrating it into the approach you take to driving project quality, to engaging new organizations and sharing with them identifiers that they should consider with using in their project design, supporting a comparability between projects. I don't know whether you do analysis around the projects that come through at national level. And also, you know, at the very core, you can look at who would benefit from understanding a simple model of the entrepreneurship competences. As Margherita explained, you know, it really is at the very top level. You can explain to someone, well, these are the 3 competence areas. And those ideas and opportunities, resources, interaction. And beneath that, you have 15 competencies. And that simple diagram of 15 competencies can really help someone perhaps see what is meant by this. And, for example, in Egypt, not an Erasmus Plus initiative, but the Egyptian government decided to bring together a number of different donor organizations, like US aid, like the European Commission aid money, like GIZ, a German organization, UNIDO, a UN agency. They were all putting money into teacher training in Egypt. in the vocational training sector. And the Egyptian government realized this and thought, right, we will bring together these agencies and try and create some, get them talking, get them understanding what they're doing, and get them collaborating to create a more coherent approach so there's no duplication, so they perhaps consider how to fill the gaps. And actually that group, which is a very innovative way of organizing donor organizations, they have now decided that EntreComp is their model for entrepreneurship education, entrepreneurial learning in Egypt for that network. So those 5 donor organizations have decided to adopt EntreComp with the support of the Egyptian government, the Ministry of Education. So that's a great initiative. So that simple model can really bring people together. And that's one of the case studies, I have to say, in the user guide. We've got some great examples coming in here. Simple action, building a MOOC in our national language, yes. Take inspiration from a MOOC that's been developed by European Schoolnet through the iLink project. You can find information on that through the user guide. Sharing EntreComp during the South Summit International event taking place in October in Madrid, yes. Great. If you join under collaborative space for entrepreneurship education in the school education gateway, you can obviously get in touch with us about things that we may be able to share with you to help that, to save you duplicating work that perhaps we've already done. To a very basic extent, taking the presentations that we've used. Tell colleagues about EntreComp, definitely. Speak about the webinar, share information with the Youth Information Services Network, certainly, that sounds very good. And looking at it, use it, one of the pillars of the Youth at Work National Agency Strategic Partnership, definitely, and participate in more webinars about EntreComp. Maybe if there's ideas that you have, and maybe you can add them to this. We'll have a new poll now, which will just be our last poll, and then we'll close. What would be for you? What support? What help? What advice? What guidance would be useful on EntreComp? What support is needed next? What should be considered? These are messages that can be passed on to others. There are many organizations working on EntreComp. There are Erasmus Plus projects that are driving change and really developing new value around EntreComp, like, for example, the EntreComp for Educators project, and other projects. iLink have already done some amazing work. So what support is needed next? What do you need as someone who's working in an Erasmus Plus national agency to drive this, to help you share this, implement this, get this out there? You have the framework. You have the original research report on that. And now you also have a user guide, the EntreComp into Action, Get Inspired, Make It Happen user guide. What support is needed next? And yes, I mean, this is the first answer that's coming up is translation. And I absolutely agree. Google Translate is not good enough on this. So help desk and technical support for specific questions on how best EntreComp could be incorporated. Okay, yeah, that's good. Maybe this is something we could, with the collaborative space, could actually have a couple of seminars, online seminars, where people can just ask questions when they're going through their project preparation. We're also talking about an opportunity for the collaborative space to create something like Pitch My Project. There's often a challenge around dissemination of projects that are working on a common theme. So trying to create, project coordinators, helping them to understand which other projects are out there that perhaps are doing something similar, or providing just a platform to be able to say, we've shared this on an international basis. So Pitch My Project could be something coming up soon from the collaborative space. And we'd be very interested to be in touch with yourselves to work with the projects linked to entrepreneurial learning, linked to EntreComp from your countries. Okay, any other ideas coming through here? What support do you need to make this happen, to help implement EntreComp, to make it truly European? feel free to answer the same answer, because what that shows us is that you really would like this. And this is, this is to answer, put some into this box is to make it known what you need, to share that with people who might.
Now, is the sound on? Yes, okay. So indeed, I think that there is a problem with the connection in Brussels, but I can take up some of the questions. For instance, the issue of the is translation of the document. We are well aware. Okay, I work on the JRC, and this file is shared with policy DGs. So we are not trying to bounce to each other responsibility on this. For the moment, we have decided not to proceed with translation, to allow for this appropriation from those actors that want to really customize to their context. The same is true for digital competence, the digital competence framework that has not been translated by the Commission in national languages. But this is the decision so far. I don't know if connected there are people from Florian from ETF. ETF is the European Training Foundation that supports partner countries in developing entrepreneurial learnings and key competencies under the Small Business Act and the measures that are intended to support partner countries, and they do extensive work on translating and adapting the framework to the context in which they bring it. For instance, they have done active support in Ukraine, they are working in Georgia, they are working in Egypt as well, they have supported Montenegro, they have supported and they have an ongoing call or an upcoming call, better said, to award, to give an award to those institutions that are fostering entrepreneurial learning. That last year during the EU Vocational Skills Week was awarded to Palestinian University, and as I mentioned, they have done work in support. But from Central Commission Service, for the moment, the decision is not to do the translation. However, the demand is so high that it is always on our agenda to discuss whether we stick to this decision. Other things that I can add? You're back.
I'm back. I think
yes,
so.
You're back.
Sorry about that.
So I disappeared.
Okay, great.
So.
Yes, thank you for stepping in there, Margherita. I was just about to exactly say that, which was it's being used around the world. And everywhere I go, people are interested. I'm going to start my webcam, and then you can see me. There we go. Hopefully not frozen this time. Hello. Excellent. So, yes, I think it's being used around the world. There's a lot of interest. I think we can only expect more uptake, and it really is about what channels, what mechanisms are there to support that, to drive quality within that. And national agencies are an important route for that. So we're very pleased to have had you involved in this. And we're very pleased to have had your interest. It's greatly appreciated. And as I say, we've got some ideas from you on what you need to help you achieve this. It is a key one of those is translation. Anyone can translate this document. So if you want to take, the plunge to translate this document, then please go ahead. Margherita can probably say what kind of license it is, but it's definitely something that you can translate and adapt and use. The framework itself and the EntreComp user guide, Margherita, it comes under a particular, it's not Creative Commons license. What is it exactly? Remind me.
Yes, it's released under the Commission reuse policy. So it's basically like Creative Commons. You just have to acknowledge the source, but you can translate it, adapt it, make all derivative work possible, even for commercial purposes, without even asking us. It's nice if you inform us so that we are aware and we can keep track of what is happening, but it's not a requirement. You just have to quote the original source. That's it.
Great. And am I right in thinking that there is a method by which people can contact, can submit a practice or submit a comment on the JRC website?
You are indeed right. There is a link that goes either to a functional mailbox or directly to my mailbox, in which we are compiling input that we receive. And so far, our focus was collecting all the cases for the guidelines, but there will be a moment in time in which we also use more extensively our website to give visibility to what's out there. Also because the guidelines are a PDF for the moment, so it's closed, and before we update it, maybe there is room to use a more flexible things like a web page.
And, on behalf of, I work with a lot of people in the sort of entrepreneurial skills development community in Europe. Margherita is a great central point. So if you have an idea, you have a comment, you can pass it through to Margherita, and she can, share that with someone that she feel can assist or directly herself. And also, of course, you've got the School Education Gateway collaborative space where you can add a comment, you can ask a question, you can download resources. The link to the guide is on there, and we will be following up with, I think, additional webinars this year to support this work with targeted audience. Today we've done 2 webinars with policymakers and with national agencies, and I think this is something that we can continue, but we need your input to guide how best we do that. So we'll be in touch. I think I just offer out, has anyone got any last comments that you'd like to share or say or ask? If you want to add them in the chat box now. Because otherwise I think we can bring this to a close. We've run a little bit over time. But I hope that we've covered the what, the why, the when and the how of EntreComp, and I hope that we've related that to national agency context, to the work that you do and the work that you support around Europe. I really, on behalf of people who I do apply for Erasmus Plus projects, and I appreciate the support that comes through from national agencies and the EU level. So I will say thank you very much. If there's anything that you'd like to comment on or add, there'll be a link coming out to get a bit of feedback, to to share your ideas on what could happen next, coming out to you directly. And I hope that we will hear from you and that we will link up with you in the future. Please join the collaborative space. Please go there, look at the links, look at the information. Please add anything that you can think of into the projects box, and feel free to get in touch and share any idea or comment. Thank you so much. It's been really great to talk to you, and we hope it's been useful. Thank you very much. We'll speak to you next time.